And by sheer coincidence, we're joined by by Rob Buckle, who's here to talk about pyramids and crop circles. And I wonder if you think whether cymatics has got anything to do with the way crop circles form.
Well, not that I've come across, although the way circle makers get their inspiration may be influenced by things like that. Yeah. But I have a slightly different belief about how crop circles are formed, and most of it through my research is, it's quite clear that it comes through humans, but that there's a whole other story to be told there as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. So I guess there's a couple of questions there. One is, do you think all crop circles are created by humans? And then what do you think it is that's manifesting in the humans that's doing such amazing work late at night in the fields?
Well, to answer the first question, I think it's quite clear to me that all of the circles that you'll see this year and in the last few years at the very least have been man-made. And I would say that there's a small element, there is a mystery to them in terms of how they came about, a very small percentage, and mostly the very early simple circles, just a plain circle. Those were sort of in the late 70s, early 80s, and how they came about in the first instance is a little bit more of a mystery. So I've got an open mind about them. But as the subject evolved, humans invariably took over, and the whole subject has been through humans since then. Yeah. But it's not a simple case of these are just hoaxed formations, there's people just going out in the field and having a laugh and making crop circles just for the hell of it. There is something else at play, and it comes into where you're asking the question about how they get their inspiration and things like that. Well, that's the biggest mystery, and that's why I'm interested in the subject, because there seems to be another element at play here. There seems to be something else directing it. It seems that the people that have been involved in circle making are picking up on something in a wider consciousness that is almost guiding this process. It's as if the whole subject had to happen.
So what is it that gives you that impression? Obviously, you've spoken extensively with the circle makers, and I saw your talk at the Stonehenge Truth Juice gig, which I really enjoyed. I'm thoroughly looking forward to this outing of yours. But what is it? Are there specific things that have given you cause to wonder what it is that's coming through these people?
Well, it's when you start to see that a human-made circle has incredible properties to it. It influences the energy field, and this has even been picked up on Geiger counters and all sorts of things. And this is where initially researchers were saying that it's impossible that this could be a man-made circle, because this particular formation has changed the energy field. We can see the physical evidence on our Geiger counters, and humans can't do that. So there must be something else at play. Yet some researchers have actually witnessed these being made. As Simeon Hine actually watched Matthew Williams and his team make a formation, witnessed the whole thing from start to finish. They took readings before they made the formation in the field to make sure that there was nothing there that they could pick up with the Geiger counters and so on. And they took readings during and after the formation. And after the formation had been completed, the Geiger counters were going off the scale. The energy readings were enormous from that. And Simeon was saying that he'd never come across a circle that had such high readings as that. And he couldn't explain that. So he started to look at the human element of that and what's actually going on here with involving humans. There seems to be some interplay between the fact that humans are getting involved in this, and they're putting down a design, a geometric design often based on sacred geometry principles, and interacting with the live crop itself seems to be producing something incredible.
I can't help wondering whether it's the geometries that are actually being used, because whilst humans might not be able to do that sort of thing, geometry certainly can.
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, even a simple circle has enormous power. And I think crop circles are very much linked to the idea of stone circles and how they were originally created and what they were used for. The fact that you're putting down a simple circle and it's used for ceremony, it's used as a sacred space, and it creates something magical. And yes, I think the geometric design, every geometric design has its own imprint on the land, and is creating a frequency that is interacting with the earth, and that I think is having a massive change. But I think it has to have the human input. Without the human element, there's some part of the magic missing, and this is what a lot of my talk is going to be about tomorrow, and how there's three key elements that make up what I call the magic of crop circles, and that is the earth element, which we've already mentioned, the spirit element, and the human element. Those three parts then produce something magical. And in terms of the spirit interaction, there is a lot of interaction of otherworldly entities, shall we say. And I've experienced some of this as well around crop circles. It seems almost as if the crop circle itself is opening up a temporary portal, and there's a lot of interactions, a lot of what you might call paranormal activity happens around it. People have seen entities. There's been balls of light, lots of reports of balls of light, and just lots of strange phenomena.
You've actually got some amazing photos of the balls of light, if I remember rightly, haven't you? And they're moving. They seem to be coming towards the camera, and they're not like, just for people who are listening, they're not like the orbs that we see in static photographs. They're really lively things that the cameraman's obviously engaged with.
Yes, there have been some incredible footage taken of balls of light, particularly around crop circles as well. So there seems to be an interaction between them, and I've got my own ideas about what these balls of lights are.
Go on then, let's hear them.
Well, I think there's different levels of balls of light. It's almost like a hierarchy, if you like. But there's the ones that you described that you might pick up on photographs, which are very opaque kind of balls of light, which you don't actually see with the naked eye. And there's others that you can see with the naked eye, which are larger, more formed, and particularly at night you will pick them up. You'll see. I've myself have witnessed quite a few of those in the Wiltshire area. There's a few of them have been out on night watches, particularly looking for this kind of phenomenon, because it's it's renowned in that area in Wiltshire, particularly around the ancient sites, that you will often get sightings of strange phenomena, balls of light being probably the most common. And these things I've seen literally rise up off the ground, hover in the air, move around, drop back down again. I've seen them moving at speed across the sky, and I haven't actually got footage of those, but other people have. But I think they're certainly intelligent. There is an intelligent aspect to that, and I think it's linked to ancient ancestors. And there's other stories as well that I can tell you which go a little bit further than that. But do you want to wait till tomorrow? Or?
No, it's good to chat about them now. But it's good to chat about them now. But we can always chat about it again when I've heard you talk. So, have you got any theories as to what these otherworldly characters are that's involved in this schema, and how are the humans related to them? I mean, do they feel that there's some kind of intercommunication going on, or do they just feel motivated from within to go and do incredible geometrical landscaping feats?
It's a bit of both, actually. Sometimes the circle makers aren't actually aware of that interaction going on to that extent. They feel as if something's going on, but they're not quite sure what it is. But others are actively trying to engage in that interaction and are aware of that. I think it's all part of the collective consciousness, and humans are tapping into that, and this consciousness goes across the dimensions and across time, so I think we're interacting with ancient ancestors and also possibly beings from other dimensions, which I think are also linked to the human race in some ways. And I think this is what I'm trying to explore now in terms of the portal aspect of crop circles and the Wiltshire area. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that there are active portals in that area that are interdimensional.
And have you seen any evidence of what's coming through these portals? I mean, and do you think that these are generally beneficial influences?
Well, I think the balls of light are certainly evidence of things coming through that. There's been hundreds, thousands of UFO sightings in that area as well, the Wiltshire area, which we're talking about areas like Avebury, Stonehenge, Silbury Hill. Many, many sightings of UFOs and other strange phenomena, alien beings, or what we'd call alien beings, but just, not quite human beings. But whether the intentions are always positive, I'm not entirely sure. There's some evidence to suggest that it's not. I know a number of people that have encountered beings who are just simply black, shadow beings, some people call them, but just black figures, and they seem to have a bit of an ominous presence. They seem to be a little bit intimidating. They have even been known to chase people out of fields. Circle makers have been chased out of fields by these things. I know people who've had quite frightening experiences from that. But on the other hand, there's been encounters that have been very positive. So it's very difficult to say what, if there is an overall intention, what that is. But it seems to be that we are interacting with other dimensions of some sort, and maybe it's not all under our control. Maybe we're opening up windows and it's allowing in all sorts of energies, some good, some bad.
What is it about those? I mean, I thought I'd seen wood engravings of kind of crop circles from back in the 17th, 18th century. But you say that the earliest ones are sort of 1970s. What is it that's difficult to explain about those early ones?
Well, the one you're referring to, I think, comes from an ancient tale of the mowing devil.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's it. And there is a wood carving depicting a little devil creature cutting down the crop. I don't know if that is the same thing, but it does show the figure cutting the crop rather than laying it down. Yeah. So it may be slightly different. It may have just been a case of sabotage in the field from somebody. I don't know. And but there has been many reports. Farmers have said there's been reports that they've seen crop circles of flattened crop in their land for many decades, and they haven't reported it to anybody. So sometimes it could be wind damage, sometimes it could be a natural phenomenon. I'm not entirely sure what they've seen, but the modern phenomena as we know it sort of kicked off around the late 70s, early 80s, and very slowly did it enter the public consciousness. And it was really only when it did that things started to get complicated, and we started getting more of the complex designs creeping in, and it sort of peaked well after it seemed to have ended. When it was all exposed around 1991, with Doug and Dave being unmasked as being responsible for a lot of the circles. that wasn't the case. They weren't the only ones doing that, and there was a lot of unexplained things going on as well. But it sort of died away for a few years, and then it re-emerged with the great complexity that we're familiar with. So there was like different phases to it, and I think there's an element of control in that, in terms of how it happened, and that's quite a big area that I probably haven't got time to go into at the moment. But I do feel as if there's been some cover-up in terms of what this is all about, and there's been a lot of research has been putting out misinformation about what this is all about, trying to lead us down the path that it's only aliens, say only aliens, because that I don't think is as big as realising that it's something to do with us, and we're actually capable of so much. But when we actually realise what we're capable of, and we're capable of interacting with multiple dimensions and producing fantastic works of art in a few hours in the dead of night, as they do, we start to suddenly realise, gosh, we can do something here. And I think it's that element that has always been suppressed, and you'll find most crop circle researchers won't go down this route. They won't necessarily say it's all aliens, but they won't say it's all humans. They like to keep the element of mystery to it, and they will not talk about the Circle Maker's story. And I'm one of a very few numbers of researchers that will actually talk about the Circle Maker's story, in itself. And I think that's the most interesting part of it, because they have such incredible stories to tell.
Are there a lot of Circle Maker? I mean, they presumably work into. I mean, I'll be honest. I look at what they're doing as a kind of amateur geometer, and every now and then I've seen the keys and I've tried to mimic on a piece of paper what's being done in the field. And I'm also a landscaper, and I generally, even for a simple garden, I'll allow a couple of people a couple of days to mark out a garden, which is nothing like what we're talking about here. I mean, they're obviously tremendously sophisticated in the techniques they've got and the ways they can plan things and execute them. I mean, how many teams of them are there, do you know?
There are, or there have been, quite a number of teams, but I would say there's only certain key circle makers that are the ones that are coming up with the designs and are really responsible for so many things. I couldn't put a number on that. I don't know them all personally. I know certain ones, and I know of many others, but there are, I would say, a relative handful of very, very expert circle makers. One of them I can actually name, because he publicly, he doesn't do crop circles anymore. He's come out and he now does sand circles. It's a guy called Julian Richardson, and you can see the sand circles that he produces are of the same standard. They're absolutely phenomenal as well, and he produces these designs on a beach in between tides in around about 4 to 5 hours length of time, and that is approximately the same length of time it would take them to do a crop circle in the dead of night. The only difference is with the light aspect. But people always say, well, it's impossible to see anything out in the dark. Well, I've actually experienced being out with a team on one occasion, and you can see surprisingly well when your eyes adjust to it. And they are incredibly organised, and they do these things. They take it seriously, and they often will have a spiritual element to it as well. They'll do a ceremony before they begin, and they'll ask for guidance, they'll ask for inspiration, these kind of things, and that they'll put a good intention on it. So there seems to be also, I think, another element to it that makes it so perfect. So they're interacting with something that actually makes it the perfect design that it is. Sometimes they're not even aware of certain coincidences and certain things that happen that actually make the crop circle what it is, and everybody talks about that aspect of it, maybe the positioning of it, or the relationship with certain features of the land, or it may even be a mistake they've made on it that actually turns out to be something very significant, which they hadn't even planned.
So that makes it quite, if it's all people deciding where to put these things, it makes it interesting that they're staying so centred around Wiltshire and Barbary Castle and all of these ancient sites, because they don't roam much, do they? I mean, there's a lot of crops in a lot of fields that nobody ever goes anywhere near. Do we know why they're doing it in the ancient places?
Well, I think it's just this area around Wiltshire is just such a powerful area for earth energies, and they're drawn to those areas. It's not so much the case at the moment. It seems to have moved away quite a bit. I mean, there has been crop circles cropped up all over the country, but Wiltshire is, for the majority of the time, that was about where 90%, 80% at least of the crop circles were. But if you go to that area and explore that area, you can see why. It's just rich in history, and it has an energy about the place, and it all adds to the magic. And there is an element of the circle makers wanting to add to that magic as well. And but I do honestly feel they are drawn to that area because that's where they seem to get these experiences. Like I've explained before, on the night watches, quite often you will see balls of light. People have reported entities, and this seems to be the hub of a lot of otherworldly activity. And that's why I think it's possibly linked to portals, and there is evidence of that historically as well.
So are we getting any closer to understanding by going out on the night watches and taking documentary evidence and all of that? Do you think we're getting any closer to finding out what is actually happening?
Well, I'd like to think so. You'll have to come to my talk tomorrow to find out.
I'll be there.
But I think we are moving towards. Well, I think I am anyway. But the most researchers still seem to be hooked up on keeping the mystery going, and this is the biggest problem with the subject. That most researchers they've made it into a business. And that's always a mistake when you're dealing with something like this, because you have vested interest in something. But if your vested interest is only the truth, you have to constantly keep changing your story, because I've changed my view on this subject all the time, because the more you research into something, the more you uncover that what you first believed isn't quite the case. But it's totally wrong to say, well, that didn't fit with my belief, so I'm going to ignore that, and I'm going to stick with this. Which is what most researchers are doing, and this is why the subject does seem to keep going round and round in circles, if you pardon the pun.
It's really exciting. I'm looking forward very much to hearing you talk. Do you include pyramids now in your subject matter? Is that because there turns out to be a connection between the crop circles and the pyramids, or is it just a new area of interest?
Well, it's always been an area of interest for me, but I do see parallels between crop circles and sacred sites generally, and there's a lot of similarities between what makes up a crop circle and what constitutes to the magic of pyramids as well. And this is the connection between the spirit energy, the earth energy, and the human input. And I think what the ancient ancestors, the builders of the pyramids and some of the great sites around the world, what they knew was how to connect all this together. And this is really where I'm going with my research, and it's saying, well, okay, we can now say, yes, people can make crop circles, but what else can they do? And we're actually going back in time now and saying, look, we used to do this. We could make pyramids of this standard. People still are in awe of the Great Pyramid of Giza, because we cannot do that now, or we think we can't do that now. But this is what I believe is we can, but we have to use our minds in the correct way, and we have to interact with nature in the right way. We have to interact with spirit in the right way, and stop playing silly games and pretending this doesn't exist. And and giving our power to believing it's all aliens and all this kind of thing. When we start to look at ourselves and what we can do amazing things, and our ancient ancestors proved that, and I think that's where we now need to go, in that direction.
That's absolutely great. Thank you very much, Rob. I think that's a really good place to leave it. Thank you. Like I say, I'll definitely come and catch up with your talk, and perhaps we'll get to talk some more.
Yeah.
But thanks very much for making time for Dr. Rock's radio show tonight. Yeah, we got here we go. We've got a few people in the tent around us, so I'm going to put on another couple of tunes whilst we sort out what happens next. I've still got Rob here because I realise there's a few things that I forgot to ask him. One of the things is that, as he said, he's a man who's seen people making crop circles. So I'm just wondering what sort of basic techniques he uses. How are they doing that amazing stuff with crops in the dark in a field? What sort of tools are they using?
Well, it's surprisingly simple, actually. I think as long as the team are organised, it's incredible what they can achieve with very simple tools. And the main tools are board stompers or rollers for certain flattened areas. And they will use marker poles for the more complex formations. Other than that, there is surveyor's tape and not much else, to be honest.
That's amazing, because again, one of the things that brings to my mind is the fact that what you're getting is just amazingly complex and beautiful things, using the methods the old geometers used, which are basically straight edges and radii.
Yeah, well, I say the secret really is being organised, and people can't comprehend the amount of planning that they would go into some of this with the top circle makers. There are others that will do things a little bit more spontaneously, but the ones that most people seem to be familiar with, the big, incredible designs, there are actually less of those than people think in terms of the proportion of all the crop circles. So, I mean, out of a season, generally speaking, you would get around about 50 to 60, maybe more crop circles in 1 year. But out of those, you'd probably get about half a dozen to a dozen maximum that are of a very high standard.
And that's because there's very few top grade teams operating, and you seem to think, at least at the moment, it's a thing of the past.
I think at the moment, yeah, the subject seems to be fading a little bit. I think it peaked around about 2009, 2010. Since then, a lot of the top circle makers have moved on because there's so much politics in that subject. It's unbelievable, and they feel as if they're being treated like criminals all the time, or they are treated like criminals. And even by the circle researchers who make their living from their work, they're still treated as if they're criminals, and it's a strange paradox. And a lot of them have moved on, but the subject still seems to limp on, but with newer, less experienced teams.
So why do you think they are treated like criminals? It's not just because of what they do to the crops, is it? I mean, do the military have an interest in what these people are doing? Because it strikes me that if they're being gainsaid, and if people are wanting to see them marginalised and things like that, it's possibly because they're involved in something that's important and worthy of notice.
Yeah, well, that's an element that I've looked at as well. I've considered that. Well, there certainly can't be any admission from most circle makers that the best circles are man-made, and even though some of them are actually even made to order, believe it or not, by some of the researchers, they still won't acknowledge that publicly. They'll still make it seem as if there's a mystery behind it when they know it's not. There's so many different elements to this subject, it's unbelievable. And there are some connections, I believe, to intelligence services, which has muddied the waters even more. Some circle makers have had connections there in the past. Certainly not all. Most of them will not have. Most researchers don't have, but and this is not something I know, but I certainly believe there must be some other influence on researchers and some circle makers to keep the subject along the lines that it can be controlled. The lines that I'm going down, looking at the human element to it, can't be controlled so much because it opens up a whole new area. As long as people are prepared to believe it's aliens, they're quite happy with that because it's of no danger, it's of no threat to anybody, and it's just a little, trivial subject.
I find that really interesting, that the idea that it might all be done by aliens is a trivial subject, whereas the fact that it's done by humans is really regarded as worthy of keeping quiet.
Well, I say trivial in the sense that most people won't take it seriously. It's just seen as a little bit of a minority interest. So people don't really take it that seriously. But when you start to say there's something going on with humans here, and we can, scientifically start testing this kind of thing, it opens up a massive new area. And that's where I think they don't want to go.
Yeah, because I know that there was a reasonable bit of research done with Hamish Miller when he was dowsing. They used a computer and electrodes on his head to see that he was using his brain differently when he was dowsing than when he wasn't dowsing, and my guess is the same thing's happening with the circle makers. So before we let you go, are there any books or websites of yours that you'd like to recommend for people?
Well, I've got a YouTube website, YouTube page. If you can easily find it, you just type in Rob Buckle, which is Buckle, crop circles, and that will throw up my page. There's a few lectures that I've done on there, a few of them going back 2 or 3 years, but that will give you the full background to how I got into this, and you can see the development of my thinking if you watch those videos in sequence. But the talk that I'm doing tomorrow is more to do with linking it into the next level, which is of looking at the human potential.
Very good, thank you very much. I think we've got a question from the audience, which, because it's quite dim in here, I couldn't read, so I'll hand him the mic and we'll see where we go.
Thank you. Am I right in thinking that there's a few circles that have not been claimed by humans, that we didn't do them?
Well, there's always stories, almost every year, that some crop circles can't be explained. On almost every year, there's 1 or 2 crop circles that crop up that even circle makers don't know where they came from, and there's unexplained elements to circles. I mean, that's an area that interests me. That there was one crop circle appeared 2 years ago. I know the guy that led the team on that, so I know it was man-made. But they made this circle, and it was in quite a prominent area, and it was the night that we're having a meteor shower. I don't know if you can remember that day. There was a big meteor shower, and it was clear skies, and a lot of members of the public were out looking at the skies, and they were making this circle, and they could hear people quite close to them. So they thought, we're going to cut this short, because they thought they were going to get seen and found out, because car headlights kept coming over the field and things like that. So they finished it off quickly. It was like a ring of interlocking circles, and it was meant to have a design in the middle, but they left the design in the middle. And the next, well, I think it was a few days later, the middle was filled in, and to this day they don't know who or what filled it in. And it was the design that filled in the middle wasn't the design that they had. It was similar, but it was different, but it worked a treat. It made the circle one of the best of that year. But amongst them, normally circle makers know who's responsible for what between them, but they haven't been able to locate who did that, but they did a good job of it, whoever it was. So there's little things like that happen. And there are, as I say, there was, going back to the early days, there's circles that do appear that you can't explain it. Normally they're quite simple designs, usually just a plain circle or a variation of a simple circle with elements added to it, but not the very complex ones generally.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Rob. And we'll report back on your talk over the weekend. Well, thanks for being here with us.